we start with the idea of this project? How did you come up with the idea of doing this?
So the project started before Juneteenth ever was voted in as a national holiday. And I wanted to make a piece about Juneteenth. I wanted to commemorate it. And I also, at that time, was hoping that the piece would push forth and help to quicken the idea of it becoming a national holiday. And then after it does, it would be there right at a sort of pivotal moment of that happening. So I just had it in mind at the time and decided to push forward with it.
How did you hear about the town, and how did you develop the interest to want to go there?
I think through discussions with different people. Maybe Dion Sims was one of them, who started telling me about different groups who celebrated Juneteenth outside the U.S. And then I started researching it.
How did you identify this particular town, or what did you learn about this town that made you actually want to go there? And maybe a little bit of what did you say to Fulbright about your desire to do the project?
Well, a part of my process has to do with listening to people, working directly from people. And what I've found in the past is that when you are with a person directly and talking with a person directly, sometimes it's different than what is understood through just, research otherwise. And so the direct approach is something that has become a bit of a part of my process. So when I thought about doing this project and I started researching, I started looking at different interviews of people from the place and hearing about it, then I wanted to go there myself to see the people, to be able to talk with the people, to be able to see the place, to be able to just have a real experience there and try to deal with that through painting.
Can you explain a little bit about how long the fellowship was and receiving the Fulbright? And then did you go there before you received the Fulbright, or did you receive the Fulbright and then do a site visit and then do the residency? Can you kind of just describe that sequence?
So when I got interested in the project, we reached out to a lady named Karina Harrington, who lives in the States, but her family lives there. And we just wanted to talk with her about the community, and just touch base with somebody who was a little closer to us. And through connecting with her, she invited us to come along to visit the community. All of this happened while I was in the process of applying to Fulbright. I can't remember if, we spoke to her in the process of applying, but I can't remember if the first trip over was before I actually found out I had gotten it or after. But Karina was very welcoming. She invited us to come over. We traveled over with her, and so it was a group of us, me and my studio assistant, secretarial assistant. We all traveled over and just visited and met people, and so that we can know a bit more about what it would be like to go there and to spend that time there. And that was pretty important. And still to this day, Karina is very important in ongoing relationships with the community.
What were your goals going into it? Can you describe how many people you wanted, kind of describe your goals first, like how many people you wanted to paint, you wanted to visit the community, for 3 months? You know, just kind of, can you kind of describe what your intentions were for the residency?
So I received the Fulbright to do this project, and it would allow me to be there for about 4 months. I wanted to do portraits of about 100 people, and the 100 was going to be 100 that was a group of a larger number of 500. The other amount of people would come from America and maybe some other places, but this 100 was going to be from Mexico. And so my objective was to do 100 portraits, but I knew that once I got there, I would have to see, because we didn't know how fast things would go. We didn't know how complex, you know, it would be. I actually took a lot of materials, drawing and painting materials, but I only ended up doing the pastel drawings. My original plan was to go out and draw, come back to the studio and paint. But we found when we got there, we just had room and time just to worry with making the drawings. And so that was the objective. I wanted to talk to people, I wanted to draw people, and see what can happen with the whole act of research through painting.
Can you describe the town and what is the town like? What are the demographics like?
Nacimiento is a small sort of I wouldn't necessarily call it a border town, but it's about 2.5 hours into Mexico. And it's a small farming community there, and that's the best description of it. All of the people, it's a small community of Afro-Mexican people. You will see in my project, if just looking at them, they look like all kinds of people. But they're the name of the people there are actually Muscagos. That's what they call themselves, and yeah, that's what it is.
Can you describe how Nacimiento came to be? Can you describe their history and their history of being Muscago?
Sure. I think a part of the lineage of their people, they were Black Seminoles, and so their ancestors were Seminoles and former slaves. Some of their ancestors were there in Florida during the Seminole Wars, and they were a part of the group that was, through treaty, was allowed land in Oklahoma. So they went to make that trip to Oklahoma, but they were still facing a lot of discrimination, a lot of problems with the larger sort of, American makeup. I think they were having issues, like skirmishes, different things with people who were trying to steal back people from their groups, and all of the tension because of wars. So their people ended up making a treaty with the government of Mexico to guard the borders of Mexico from the US in exchange for land in Mexico. And so they made that treaty, then they made the trip from Oklahoma into Mexico. And when the war, and the reason they were guarding the borders of Mexico is because there was a lot of people from the U.S. Going into Mexico. For instance, there were runaway slaves running into Mexico, running south, and you don't hear a lot about that. You hear a lot about slaves going east. But there were a lot of slaves going south, and Mexico was a free nation. It wasn't like our nation here. But then Texas Rangers and slave catchers and different things were running into Mexico trying to catch these people and getting into skirmishes with the Mexican people. And so they were hired to guard their borders from the U.S. coming in and just doing whatever they wanted to do. And when the war was over, it meant that they could receive their land and, abide there in peace. And so when the war was over, when they got to receive their land, they were celebrating that day as well, because number one, now they get to receive their land and abide in peace, and that's when the community was founded. But also, some of their ancestors were blacks from the U.S. as well, which is why their culture is connected to African American culture.
So, for a minute, let's talk about 100 portraits is really ambitious over any period of time, but maybe describe the goal of 100 portraits in 4 months, and that you knew you had to move with a certain swiftness, I'm guessing. You couldn't just sit around and wait a week to get one person.
So there was a lot that's going on in the planning. Some of it I have to figure out the difference between their culture and our culture. And there were differences. Sometimes some of them would agree to sit on one day, and then a certain work that they were waiting on would come, and they would just go to work, and I would show up to paint and they would be gone. But they understood that differently than I did coming from the States. So I had to learn that. But you're talking about a small farming town. In the U.S. it's a lot almost like a neighborhood or community, like a neighborhood, and that it is a lot. Sometimes it went well, sometimes not. And then while on the Fulbright, there was a certain point in time where I would travel to talk to one of the universities when I was there, the university that was the host institution for me. So I traveled there to talk to students during that time. So there was a lot going on. It was me trying to do this work, coordinating with the university, and just trying to figure out how to do it and be calm. Because there was really a lot going on. Sometimes we would miss several days because of a funeral. And usually here, a funeral is one day and but there they last over several days, and everybody stops what they're doing pretty much. And the funeral is going on and that's it. And so, it was different.
What are the things that you found to be connections to community here? Like traditions, music, food? What kind of got your interest going with kind of what you discovered with this community in Nacimiento?
There were several connections that I didn't know going in. I knew about them celebrating Juneteenth, and I was all interested in that because my project had to do with their connection with us. I started to learn about the songs that they sing, these spiritual songs that are a lot like the black spirituals here in the States, and that they sing them in English. And sometimes they're simple little songs that, but because it's been handed down for them from one generation to the next, that historically, they take it with more importance than maybe we have here. And so they have songs that connect us, and there's the obvious celebration of Juneteenth, but there's something else that at some point I would love to look into more, is that perhaps they may have had a quilting tradition that connects to ours. It's yet to be said yet, but I've seen at least one quilt, and I know that others talked about some of the older people who had made quilts. So now I'm wondering if some of their quilts could connect to our quilts here. There was other things in their culture that aren't necessary, that, for instance, there were little bits and pieces of their language that they said connects to Gullah culture. There was, they have foods that were, I think, connect to Seminole culture. And so really their culture has bits and pieces of their entire journey in it. It's almost like every people who has become involved in the culture, and their whole journey is a part of their culture now, and maybe all cultures are like that, I don't know.
Tell me more about Juneteenth and its significance to you, and can you talk to the big project, this is a piece of this larger project, but can you kind of talk about what the larger project is and why, what it means to you?
So I think there's two things in there. The larger project was a commemorative project that, like a large piece that commemorates Juneteenth. And the way I was going to do that is, I was going to use portraiture, and Miss Opal Lee was going to be the center figure that I used to talk about Juneteenth, since she was the one in the States who pushed to get it as a national holiday. And the whole piece was going to be a sculpture of Miss Opal Lee and over 500 drawings of people who were standing behind her on a wall or in a room, who stood in solidarity with her about the Juneteenth holiday, in support of it. And the reason for that was because of an experience she had as a young lady when her and her family were forced out of their house on Juneteenth by over 500 people here in Texas when they first moved to their house. And all of their furniture and stuff was burned. I believe the house may have been burned down. And so it's a story connected with Juneteenth that sort of highlights Juneteenth, because this same lady who on Juneteenth was like a teen or a preteen, ends up pushing for Juneteenth many years later, teaching people over the years, year after year, about the importance of the holiday, until the one day when she helps to get that day passed as a national holiday. And so that was going to be the story of talking about Juneteenth. And in that story, the folks in Nacimiento also stand in solidarity with us on the Juneteenth holiday. And so it was about a way of getting an international story that deals with Juneteenth and the celebration of it and how important it is, because it is an important holiday in this nation. And that's a whole another conversation. But just to touch on that just a little, Juneteenth is so important because our nation, part of the identity of our nation has to do with freedom, and has to do with our push for freedom and freedom for all. But for all of that time, we had slavery, not freedom. So on the day, to celebrate the day when the final state was allowed that freedom, is to celebrate freedom within the nation. We were celebrating freedom from Britain, but we had to, this next celebration was a celebration of freedom within. And that's so important to the identity of America. So that's why, that's the importance of it. That's why I wanted to do the piece. And I wanted to approach the piece like I do many of my other works, first personal, and from a personal standpoint, then I go sort of out into, looking at it from a general, national, regional, national, and even international look. And so I started with Miss Opal because that's somebody I knew, I grew up with, I knew her personally. And since she was the one who really had been pushing for a long time to get that day passed, I thought, let's make a monument to this holiday, and I want to use her as a character in that monumental piece.
What did you discover through this project? Kind of what in your mind was reinforced and what changed from kind of what you went into expecting and what you came out of, and kind of where you are on this side of the project with the community, with the people?
Again, one of the things that started happening in my work is that the work started expanding to become more than just studio work. Some of my work is actually social engagement and socially engaged projects. And I started to see this in the first project I did, where I drew a community and sat down and listened to a community that you can use art to listen. And I saw the possibilities of also responding after you listen. And so in this project, it was similar. I went in, I had an agenda, I started on it, but with most of my art, and like many other artists, when you start into a project, that's the beginning. Somewhere along the line, the project goes, takes some steps, or something happens that is different from what you imagine. And once the unexpected enters in, I always feel like that's when the art really gains its identity. Like that's when it really comes. You start to know what it's actually about, although you thought you knew what it was about. And with so many works of art that I do, I think I know what I'm doing. I'm going after something. It's not on some levels. You're still going after the same thing, that you go in there with. But when the unexpected comes up, the art changes a bit and it gains its true identity. And that's sort of what happened in this trip. After I started meeting the people, I started hearing from the people, I started just knowing more about this community. What started to happen is that I started to see that although I have a project about Juneteenth that I'm trying to do in this community connected with ours, it seemed to me that there should be a project just dealing with this community, irrespective of their connection necessarily to ours. In other words, they needed a project just about them. And it left a conundrum in my spirit. How do I do that? I can't just not do the project that I set out to do, because it was worth doing and I think it's important. But I did feel like there should be something to address the the beauties of this community in and of itself. And at that point, I decided that what I would do was do two projects. I would let the old project continue to be the one that I went over to do, but I would do paintings of the people from Nacimiento from the drawings. And the paintings would be different because of my approach to painting, different from the way I draw, but it also would be different because it would be about Nacimiento versus about their larger connection to like all of those who celebrate Juneteenth.
So what is the difference between your approach with the works on paper and the paintings? How did that come about, and what is the significance to you of taking it from paper to oil and all of that?
So one significance of doing one significance of the whole thing is that it's a new project. Now it's a different project from before. Painting, I'm comfortable with painting. I love to paint, but in the community when I was there doing the works, I sort of had to use pastels because of their efficiency, and it was wonderful to do. You know, I like using a lot of mediums, but that was a medium that fit the project. For the new project, I could do this one in the studio and I could use paint, and I was looking forward to that because I've just learned to love painting. And so I knew that, you know, I could do things in paint that I couldn't do drawing. I could build up impasto. I could make different decisions on all of the choices that I had made in the drawing. I knew I'd be able to scrutinize the drawings and then make something that were responses, but also just very different from the drawings. And what that also meant is that now there would be a project that was another project focusing on Nacimiento that these paintings are a part of, but that's what it is, the paintings are a part of it. So there's ongoing connection with the community, and hopefully we'll be able to bring some workshops there, and hopefully we'll be able to get some of them here, and we're building a stronger connection with the community and using art to help be that connector. And through that connection, I think it builds both of us up, them and us. There's something of our culture that's in their culture, and there's something of their culture that inspires us. And so the new project is about making that connection and us building each other up.
But what was the turning point for you when you realized it wasn't that you were just going to go do these 100 drawings and come back and move on to the rest of that project, but that you wanted to keep circling back and you wanted to make what motivated you to want to make Nacimiento a subject in and of itself?
When you meet the people there, and that's what motivated me. I sat down with people and talked to them, and just in seeing their heart, seeing who they are, knowing their aspirations, and knowing what I do as an artist, how through art, I use art as social engagement. I use it for building up communities. I use it as a way to really bring about positive change and uplift. I'm doing it here, not just through painting, but through other projects like Kinfolk House. And I saw the opportunity to use those skills and abilities along with painting there, which is an interesting thing because most socially engaged art projects don't really incorporate studio art. They usually look very different than studio art. But I think that studio art could weave itself into what we call social engagement and create a different look at socially engaged art practice.
Oh my gosh, that's a whole subject. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit more about what you think studio art brings to social engagement and social change and those things? Can you kind of talk about what you think are the benefits and kind of the necessity of an art practice that's a social practice that's actually studio art?
Yeah, it's it's all woven in there together. So a couple of things that studio art allowed me to do is it allowed me to sit with people, one at a time and one group at a time. It allowed me to listen. It allowed me to look at people and get to know them personally. And it allows for to create like a portrait of that community. And in that portrait, you're hearing from the community. And through listening and the portrait, so one of the things is it starts to show you sort of who they are, what they actually look like, what's on their mind and on their heart. That's like kind of like a phase one of a project. Because every time you paint something, you make choices. And all of those choices help to give a certain vision. Like each one of these people, there's a certain look at them and a certain you decided to do this and you didn't decide to do that. And at the end of it, you end up with this image of a person that paints a picture of them. Well, in the same way, there is the possibilities of painting pictures of what you want to see, like painting the best possibilities of something, painting something, you looking at it, seeing I want to say seeing the best in it, but envisioning it in a certain way so that encapsulated in that vision of a person, of a community, is their aspirations, is what they look like at their best. And when you can paint that kind of picture, you can see it. You sit that positive image in front of your face, then it allows you to push toward that. It helps you to become what you're seeing. And that's really important power. Like, it's almost like if you take a young person and they're allowed to see themselves in the best light, see themselves as successful, see themselves as what they could become, then they can become that because they have a vision of it. And so I think that is possible when doing this kind of work, is that you sort of get a vision from the people. You get a sense of like the best that this could be. And then once we see it, once we hear it, once we start getting a feel for what it looks and feels like, smells like, and tastes like, then it helps to paint that picture and move into that reality, so.
Tell me how you think a traditional paint practice, how does it tilt into social engagement, and how does it tilt into a social practice?
I think it probably would have to be the artist, because every artist is doing something, And most and many artists are making objects of contemplation. And many times in art, that's where it ends. And that's very important, because if people are contemplating on whatever the idea is, ideas change the world, right? And you see that, let's say, Cubism. It's just an idea, but once architects caught a hold of Cubism, and then they start building buildings and structures, the next thing you know, you're living in their idea. And so, you know, paintings are objects of contemplation. They affect our thought life. If they're powerful, if they're strong and engaging, they do that. But where you go one step further in social engagement, in social art practice, is that you start to engage the people more and you involve them, and it becomes something that goes past what painting does, in that just contemplation. It turns into projects. It turns into engagement. There's like a real sort of back and forth engagement with people, and that engagement causes change. So all the things that like studio art can do, that portraiture does, looking and listening, is there. Now what happens is responding to that. And the response happens in multiple ways, in numerous ways. And at a certain point, like after a different kind of response, might connect with art, but might not necessarily be my painting portraits, there will be a time at which the project shifts back around to studio art again. And there are times at which in the project it's about teaching. And there's times at which it's about engaging and connecting and creating cross-cultural connections that motivate, that teach, that change, that build. All of it starts out with the, I keep saying studio project, but it's really not studio, right? Because I went there and I had to go house to house. So I guess you could call it a studio practice, but it gained legs through the whole process of working from life and listening and taking careful notes. And then, you know, there is engagement from that point, and those engagements are both beautiful and thoughtful and creative. And when you start mixing it all together over time, it creates beautiful, thoughtful change.
Could you speak a little bit to the portraits of like the way you responded to different people differently? It seems very personalized. The ones that have, let's say, objects and things, the ones that don't have objects, you know, expressions. And so could you describe that a little bit about the different decisions you made depending on the person that was sitting in front of you?
Sure. And also, you know, like one of the things I found is important about doing this particular community is the need to, I don't want to say this, so it's like a portrait of the community. And I want to say the need to let the world know who they are, because they have this beautifully rich culture. They do this large, wonderful Juneteenth celebration that all of these people come to during that time. And it draws people from all over into their community. It's just a rich, wonderful community, and part of me doing a portrait of the community has to do with, let me show this. Let me take it out and show it so that I can, from my platform as an artist, be able to highlight this community and their cultural richness. But all of it, doing the portraits of the numerous people is a bit of looking into like a bowl of gemstones, Like, you know how they're all different and they have their own singular beauty to them, et cetera, et cetera. Well, each person was like that. Like, there is a macro level to the project and a micro level to the project. And at that micro level, there was the individuals. And sometimes a great response to somebody is just to acknowledge their presence, their worth. Some of the people who I painted had never been painted before. Many of them never had a portrait before. Many of us here in the States don't. So to just do a portrait and sit down and listen to somebody and show what's valuable to them, like that is, that's an act of celebrating that person. And so sometimes you'll see somebody who, in our conversation, I might find like there are several paintings of people with pictures. And what happened in some of those cases is the people, at first, they wasn't interested necessarily in getting a portrait, and then they thought, you know, but I have this thing that's valued, and you know, could you draw or paint that? And we made the compromise of, yes, if you'll hold that picture, I'll paint it, and I'll paint a little piece of them in with it. And so, you know, that was a way in which to just have a discussion to show this little thing, this picture of them at a certain time, of a special person that was important, that really, you know, is something that was important to that individual, to that person. Other people, you know, it maybe, usually I was doing individuals, you might see like a family. And there was one gentleman, he didn't know about doing portraits, but he wanted to sit because it was an opportunity for him to get a portrait done with his 2 grandchildren. And he wanted that to just be a record of that moment of him and his grandchildren. And so in the paintings, you see all of these different responses to different people, different groups of people. Somebody might want to wear a certain hat or a certain outfit. Some other person have a certain picture. Somebody sit in a certain chair. It was like all of these different responses to, you know, the person who's sitting before me.
What do you hope a viewer who sees 101 paintings, what do you want their connection to be to this installation?
Well, I hope people will see, you know, I think they'll see different things depending on where they're coming from. But some of the things that I think are there, and, you know, I hope they'll see some interesting portraits. Number one. Number two, I hope the portraits make us think about history more, because this group of people is celebrating Juneteenth in Mexico because of the history. So I hope they help us to contemplate history a little bit more. I hope they help us to think about borders, because this is a project that's across borders, and it shows that although it's across borders, people are connected, and you know, there's a connection between them and us. They sing songs that some of our people sing in churches here today. And so I hope the work helps to us to think about that. And the funny thing is this is the normal stuff of painting. And here, like, this is sit down, paint a portrait from life of a person, or, you know, the drawing was from life and then I'm painting from the drawing, but it's a regular stuff of portrait painting, right? But I think there's actually something that gets more and more special about the regular stuff of painting as we go into the 21st century. Because the old regular stuff of painting is not the new regular stuff of painting. Like, it's not as important anymore that people sit down in front of a person. And it was important for this work to sit down in front of people and to engage them.
And their engagement was important on several different levels. It wasn't just important because, you hear directly from the horse's mouth about the person's life, but their energy literally affects how you can make this portrait. Like it's almost like a collaboration with that person. And so I hope that people seeing this work, they, for example, as a person who chooses to paint from life, chooses to sit in front of people, chooses to listen more directly, and not just research in the other ways of researching, like looking something up on a computer, or send somebody in and get some images of people and paint from those. What I think that it will give is some actual realness to the project that it wouldn't have otherwise. So some of that realness goes like this. You look at the people on the wall, and I've heard, like, sometimes with some of the research you look at, people have agendas behind the things that they write or the things that they show you. And some of those agendas might seem well, but it's an agenda rather than like a truer picture. I didn't have an agenda when I went in of who I would paint and who I wouldn't paint. For instance, it's an Afro-Mexican community, but I didn't go in and say, I only want to choose people who look quote unquote Afro-Mexican. If they don't look like that, I want to cut them out because I want to show people this is what this looks like. I went in and said, I'm going to paint this community and it looks like what it looks like. And that's what it is. And let me show you what that is. And you can see for yourself and make whatever, choices you want to about it. But this is what they say about themselves and this is what they look like.
Two last questions. Last question, and you're choosing to have text under each painting. Can you just speak to the text under each painting?
I wish I could have text up under each one.
Or some of them.
Some of them will have the text in them. Some of them I have text for and it's not on there. Some of them I just didn't include the text. So sometimes you'll see text and sometimes not. And but the text is important because they give us little snippets from the conversations that I was having with the people. And sometimes the little snippets, many times I would ask them about Juneteenth. I was interested in their insight about that, how they saw it. But then I was also interested in them. Like you would see little personal insights in there that talk about the individual or just thoughts that they have. And I just wanted to weave those two together because that's what was happening. You sit down and talk, and I made the trip there about Juneteenth, so we talked about that. But then we also talked about everything else or whatever else they wanted to talk about. And that's about seeing an individual in front of you. They're not always just things that are like super insightful or things that's gonna change the world. But it was important to see their humanity. Like, this is just another person, we're painting, and we have this time together, and look at this couple of sentences from that time. So you see the person in those cases, and you also hear these, get a few snippets from that conversation, which just gives more context to the sitting, some of what was happening in the conversation while the person is sitting there. And so it just gives more insight. It gives us more to think about as we look at this person. Like in a normal portrait, you look at the person and you think, you have all these thoughts about that individual. And really in your mind, you're thinking about this image that you're seeing of the person and what they must sound like and what they look like and where they're from and what their personality might be. And it's the same thing here, except we give you a few words from that sitting to help with that.